Washoe County Library System welcomes you to our monthly series from the Nevada Historical Society, High Noon with Neal Cobb. This afternoon's topic, History of the World War II USO Canteen, Ladies of North Platte, Nebraska with Larry Kirk. My name is Mela, and I'm so happy to be here with you today. Many thanks to the Nevada Historical Society for hosting these excellent virtual events. We appreciate their commitment to supporting our community with educational events like these. To learn more about the NHS, visit their website at nvhistoricalsociety.org. And now I would like to introduce Sherry Haynes Zorn with the Nevada Historical Society. Again, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mila. I appreciate you and the library always for helping us promote our programming and getting it out to the public. Welcome, everybody. My name is Sherry, and I am the curator of manuscripts here at the Nevada Historical Society. And we just love being able to offer wonderful programming, even during this varied time that we have. And we really appreciate the Washoe County Library allowing us to be able to do our programming, even if we don't have people on site. Today is our High Noon program, and our wonderful host, Neal Cobb, who is an honorary curator here at the Nevada Historical Society, has been helping us for many years now come up with great programming of local historians and people that are fascinated about Nevada topics and even out-of-state topics as well. So without further ado, let me introduce Neal Cobb. Thanks, Neal.
Thank you, Sherry. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Mr. Larry Kirk. I want to tell you a little bit about him. His parents had a homestead farm on the north end of what is now the United States Air Force Academy, north of Colorado Springs, Colorado. When his family, when he was in the 6th grade, moved to a ranch east of Colorado Springs. After graduating from high school, he served in the United States Navy. Following his Navy service, graduated from Colorado A&M, now called Colorado State University. He came to Nevada in the early 1960s and was employed by the University of Nevada. He is now a professor emeritus, faculty member from the College of Agriculture. The department, which no longer exists, was called the Agriculture Communication Service. Prior to coming to the university, he was a radio farm director for the radio station KFKA in Greeley, Colorado. Railroads, and particularly railroad history, has been his lifelong passion. He's also been our tech man for God Club, which has nothing to do with religion. That's the good old days, and we've been having programs since 1991. So if you ever have a chance to check that out and you're curious about the history and the movers and shakers of this area, come and watch Larry in action, because he owns all of the microphones and the rest of the stuff that makes it happen. He had a note on the bio that he sent in. He says, he says, I have always thought that the introduction should be of shorter length than the presentation. So with that, please welcome Mr. Larry Kirk.
Thanks, Neal. The subject of the presentation today is the North Platte Canteen, which existed in North Platte, Nebraska during World War II. This was 80 years ago. The time is December of 1941, 18 days after Pearl Harbor, when the Imperial Japanese Navy kicked the crap out of us. And now I want to tell you of what we had and what we did not have that relates to this presentation. It'll give you a better idea of what's going on. We did not have the interstate highway system. Instead, we had the US 2-lane highways like US 40. They went right through the center of town. We did not have an airline transportation system capable of moving large numbers of troops, and the same goes for trucks and buses. We did not have plastics or anything that resembled plastics. We did not have television, which what we had was clear channel AM radio. All electronics were tube type and very large in size. No large type refrigeration. Every food and usable item was rationed during the war and at that point in time, and there were some interesting schemes to get the supplies they needed. No propane or natural gas. The fuel of choice for cooking and heating water was kerosene. There were no cell phones, no computers, or anything like that. Mechanical adding machines and mechanical typewriters were the best we had. The railroads used a telephone communication system and a telegraph communication system and written train orders, no radios or centralized traffic control. The automobiles of the day had a manual transmission with a clutch. You had to use your left foot. No power brakes or steering, and no air conditioning. Now, to what we did have. We had a good railroad system, lots of passenger trains, and we had two railroads that were invaluable for what we are about to explain. The sleeping cars on the railroad at that time were owned and operated by the Pullman Sleeping Car Company. The headquarters for the Pullman Company was Pullman, Illinois, which is on the south side of Chicago. The War Department, which is the Pentagon of that day, the War Department contracted with the Pullman Company to assemble and operate every troop train necessary to move large amounts of materials and troops, and the railroads provided the rail line and the motive power to move the train. A typical troop train in that era consisted of one or two locomotives, one baggage car, a converted baggage car feeding the prepared rations, and 10 to 12 berth Pullman sleeping cars that would move about 500 troops. A 14-section sleeping car, sleeping one person in the upper berth and two persons in the lower booth, would sleep 52 persons. The train was approximately 800 to 1,000 feet long. Two railroads were the backbone of the system. One, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, which today is part of the BNSF, and that ran from San Diego and Los Angeles to Chicago on mostly a double-track main line. And the Union Pacific, which ran on a completely double-track main line from Ogden, Utah to Omaha, Nebraska. All of the other railroads fed into and out of these two systems. Now for a word about North Platte, Nebraska. As you will hear from a lot of people, you have to want to go there to go there. North Platte is located in the south half of the middle of the east and west part of Nebraska. It is the confluence of the North and South Platte rivers to form the Platte River, and approximately 2,000 feet in elevation. In 1941, the population was 12,000. Railroad-wise, it was and still is the division point between Omaha, Nebraska, and Cheyenne, Wyoming. The engine crews changed there, and the steam locomotive was completely refueled and lubricated. Now, as that was as background, let's talk about the North Platte Canteen. It was Christmas Day, 1941, and the United States was in its fair. The Imperial Japanese Navy had kicked the crap out of us at Pearl Harbor, and our military, because of a combination of the Great Depression and politics, was not very strong. And so the War Department called on every reserve unit and National Guard unit to active duty. That's all we had. Loaded them on hastily assembled troop trains and started them for the West Coast, thinking the Japanese, after doing Pearl Harbor, were going to attack the West Coast. In North Platte, a small group of women, thinking that the Nebraska National Guard troops would be on the first troop train, went to the depot armed with cookies and drinks and coffee and anything else they could find. They met the train, and it was not the Nebraska National Guard, it was a Kansas National Guard. So they gave everything to them, and thus the canteen was born. The canteen operated from Christmas Day, 1941, until 10 months after the war ended, and finally closed in March of 1946. A total of 51 months. It was all volunteer, by the way. Now, let's see. and they closed a total of 51 months. The canteen never missed a train, including the hospital trains after every big military action. A young woman by the name of Ray Wilson was the chairman the entire time. But the real thanks should go to every small community for at least 100 miles around North Platte, for they were the people that got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, prepared their food assignment, and stayed at the canteen on their day until the last train had left at midnight. One of the important things they did, in addition to meeting the trains and feeding the troops, they helped morale. They were colorblind. Negro troops and Japanese troops from the West Coast internment camps going to fight in Italy were treated with the same love and devotion as the rest of the troops. There were 4 types of troop trains. One were the regular troop trains, 2 were hospital trains carrying wounded to various medical facilities, 3 discharge trains used to carry troops to various discharge centers after the war, and 4 the funeral trains carrying the caskets of the deceased to a point nearest to where a funeral home would take the delivery for the interment. The funeral trains were baggage cars converted to carry the caskets, and there was a Ryder Pullman on the rear end of the train for the military escort. The canteen would probably not have existed, or at very least done so much without the cooperation of the Union Pacific Railroad. The canteen was housed in the former baggage and railway express office of the North Platte Depot, and the railroad donated all the services needed to maintain the operation. All of the kitchen stoves and dishwashers, silverware, and dishes came from the dining car department. And one side note, they had no plastic or paper throwaways or cups. Everything you used had to be washed after every use, which was great fun. 3 things not to be overlooked in telling this story, in addition to all the volunteers who used their own ration stamps to maintain the food supply, was the fact that during World War II, everything was rationed. One example was with an A ration card, you could buy 12 gallons of gasoline per month. And the national speed limit, highway speed limit, was 35 miles per hour. And another important fact was the cooperation of the Union Pacific train crews. They would notify the canteen when trains were going to arrive. Then they would stretch out the allotted 10-minute stop to nearly 30 minutes, and the train would be back on schedule within 50 miles of North Platte. The code name used on all Union Pacific communications was the coffee shop at North Platte. Now, are you ready, everybody, to the 8-minute video? This video was originally released as a part of a Youth for Christ promo, but I looked at it and said it contains everything you need to see, and pay close attention to the audio. The audio could be better. The ending relates to the Youth for Christ movement. Ready, set, go on the video.
Not far from here, just east, a number of miles, is the town of North Platte, Nebraska. Anybody know North Platte, Nebraska? You've been there. North Platte's out there. It's, you gotta want to go to North Platte. In 1941, it was a town of 12,000 people. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 12,000 people at this Union Pacific Railroad hub called North Platte. And 10 days later, there was a train coming through with National Guard troops. The word went out it was Nebraska National Guard troops, and so some folks baked cookies and stuff and went down to the train. And they went down to give them some cookies, but they looked in the windows and it wasn't Nebraska guys. They couldn't find any of their own. It turned out to be Kansas. But they stood there, with the cookies and the cakes and stuff. And finally, one young woman by the name of Ray Wilson, a drugstore clerk, said, "Well, I'm not keeping my cookies. I'm not taking my cookies home." She stepped up and gave them to one of the young men, and then everybody gave their stuff. Immediately after that, when they started moving Army troops through and sailors and stuff, Ray Wilson organized some women, and they decided they were going to meet the trains that came through North Platte, Nebraska. Bob Green, a journalist from Chicago Tribune, has written about this in a book called Once Upon a Time. And they started to meet the trains. And over the next 4.5 years, they organized, mostly women, 55,000 women from 125 miles around, 115 communities, including some here in Colorado. And they met every train that came in, sometimes up to 32 trains a day. And the Union Pacific Railway gave the restaurant to them, and they dubbed it the North Platte Canteen. And they got 10 minutes to get off the train. These guys would jump off the train, run in there, and there would be wall-to-wall tables with sandwiches and cakes and pies. One woman said, my job during the war was to make 10 angel food cakes from scratch with turkey eggs every week in the back of that train station. Everything was rationed. People had to give it out of their own goods. Only $5 came from the government, and it was a check from Franklin Roosevelt. Said, I heard you doing some good things out there, and he sent $5. The people of these towns like yours, all over that area, came there during the... These guys would jump out of the train, run in there, and there'd be hot coffee, there'd be donuts, there'd be pheasant sandwiches in season. And I said this at the Nebraska Governor's Prayer Breakfast, and the senator came to me afterwards and said, sometimes pheasant sandwiches out of season. And he said they'd get back on the train and they'd go off. Many never to return. During the course of the war, 6 million United States servicemen and women came through North Platte, Nebraska, and every single train was met. And the story would go something like this. The guy would say, I graduated from Brooklyn High School, never been out of New York City, went down and signed up on Monday. They put me on a train going west. I rode for 3 days and nights, sitting up, eating K rations, and not taking a shower, and somebody in the middle of the night said, North Platte, Nebraska, next stop. Never heard of North Platte, Nebraska. Jumped off the train, ran into a place, and I saw girls who looked like my sisters and my cousins, and women who looked like my aunts and my mom. And they had all this food, and they gave it to us. And when we left, they hugged us, and they said, Sailor, we're praying for you. God bless you. And we get back on the train, scared out of our minds, not knowing where we were going, not knowing if we'd ever come back. But when we went into that place for 10 minutes, something went away. We got back on the train and we went on. And in the middle of the night in France, with mortars coming down, when there was a lull in the fighting, a voice would come out of the darkness saying, wouldn't it be great to be back in North Platte for 5 minutes? Because love chases away fear. And when Bob Greene interviewed these guys, they'd start crying. 85-year-old guys start crying. Say, what are you crying for? He said, because here I was, an 18-year-old kid, scared to death. And I went into that place, and for 5 minutes in the middle of a night in a place I'd never been to with people I'd never met, going to a place I didn't know, somebody loved me and was kind to me. I told this story in Denver a couple years ago at the 60th anniversary of Youth for Christ Campus Life. The young woman came up to me the next morning and said, when you were telling that story, I thought about my grandpa. My grandpa was in the Navy, and he lived in Pennsylvania, and I wondered, did he go through North Platte, Nebraska? And he said, I called my mom, said, do you think Grandpa went through North Platte? And she said, I don't know, honey, why don't you call him? But you know how Grandpa is. And she said, my grandpa's 90 years old in a nursing home, and he has dementia. He doesn't remember us most of the time. But I called him, and I said, Grandpa, this is Jennifer. And he knew me after a few moments. And I said, Grandpa, does the name North Platte, Nebraska mean anything to you? And he said, North Platte, Nebraska. Instantly he was lucid. You bet it does. He said, I went in there and they gave me donuts and sandwiches and coffee, and they shined my shoes. You bet I remember North Platte, Nebraska. What is it, 60 years after the fact, that brings a 90-year-old man out of dementia? When you're scared and you're 18 and you're going off to war, and on the way, somebody loves you and is kind to you.
The point of the video that I just showed to you, or we just showed to you, was that what was expressed in human kindness and relationships was very important at that time and still important today. Now, I turn it back to somebody for questions and answers, and I don't know exactly who. Somebody's going to do that.
Hey, Larry, this is Sherry. So I will see what kind of questions we have for you. Okay. Can you tell us why you got interested in this topic in particular? It's a fascinating story. I don't ever remember hearing about it growing up, or so can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, yes, I can. I'm not the youngest kid on the block. And I'm not going to run around telling you how old I am, but I was a senior in high school, and where we lived in eastern Colorado was about 90 miles from North Platte. And so I knew about North Platte, and we had heard about what they were doing there. I actually saw the outside of the North Platte Canteen. I never saw the inside because they didn't let you in for obvious reasons. It was for the military people. That depot today is gone, but the Union Pacific has erected a big memorial there with professional flags and brass plaques that describe what happened and the importance it was to the total war effort. And it was very well done by the railroad and the town of North Platte. Uh, as, as we told you, it wasn't easy to get that much food. You had to go through the ration process. If you raised chickens and turkeys, you were killing them that morning and frying them for fried chicken because you had no refrigeration. What you prepared that day, you ate that day, or you threw it out. And so that's why I got interested. And the second reason was when I lived in Greeley, a girl who was one of the platform girls, the girls that met the train, was in high school, and she had married a farmer who lived east of Greeley, and we talked a lot about it. So that's how I got started with it.
Okay. Oh, that's exciting. Okay, we have some more questions here. The support for World War II was definitely different from the support for later wars. Why do you think that was?
Uh, Several reasons. One was we weren't very well equipped. We come through the depression, and the depression was not fun by any stroke of the imagination. And we had also got rid of prohibition, which was a good thing, I thought. And we were very well prepared to uh, fight the imperial Japanese. And I want to say that the Japanese people today are not the imperial Japanese. They were an entirely different bunch of people. The people in Japan today are wonderful, and I have lots of Japanese friends. But we weren't prepared to do it, and it was a case of we're going to do it or it's not going to happen. And in terms of manufacturing things, for example, the Jeep was born out of necessity. The wheels came from one manufacturer. They were wheels used on trucks. The motor was a Ford tractor engine motor. The transmission was Willis, and you made do with what you had, and everybody did. And the rationing was very severe. Coffee, my father. I'm gonna back up. Okay. My father said that 2 cans of coffee a month is just not going to do it. And it was that kind of life. Sugar was rationed, salt and pepper were rationed, everything was rationed. So you had to create things to feed these people. Okay, enough on
Wow.
that.
No, okay. So we have another question. Did you know Herbert Pearson, who had a ranch in Colorado, kind of where the academy was built?
hmm
Oh, you
I,
did?
I, I, my parents knew him. I didn't. I was born and raised until I was in sixth grade on what today, if you go to the United States Air Force Academy,
Yeah.
on the north end is a big rock called Cathedral Rock, and that's a recreation area. That's where my folks lived. They had a homestead there, and
Okay.
just alongside that big rock. and he was involved in all that along with my parents.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's wonderful. Um, Here, I have another question. How did people communicate schedules and details without email and text and digital calendars? So,
It really went quite well. Telegraph lines were in existence everywhere. Western Union and Postal Telegraph were a big deal in those days. The early day AT&T, the old bell system, which had 12 baby bells, including Nevada Bell, uh, it worked very well for long lines. But we and carbon paper was very important. You typed and you had multiple sheets that you typed all at the same time. People would in those days would fight for a piece of carbon paper.
oh, I bet. Absolutely. I know we still were using them not too long ago for handwritten notes. Um, I have another question. What effect um, working with the USO to help keep people positive? Can you talk
Well, they
about
were
the
way ahead
USOs?
of the USO. The USO was really founded out of what the North Platte Canteen did. And they looked around in
Okay.
Washington, D.C., and the War Department and saw what they were doing and how that affected the morale of the troops. And people remember, and the USO was born out of this. It preceded the USO.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was thinking it was kind of in conjunction. So it was
No.
afterwards. All right. Wow. All right. I have another question. You mentioned double track main line. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Okay, a railroad is a fixed guideway. Where the tracks go, the train goes. It doesn't
Okay.
go anywhere else. It's not like your car or your truck or even your kid's wheelbarrow. It goes on a fixed guideway. Okay, a double track is two pairs of two tracks side by side going from one point to another point. And that way trains could go east and trains could go west and pass each other without
Oh.
having to go into passing sidings. Because if you had a single track, you had to have passing sidings where the trains could go by each other. So the double track main line can accommodate much more traffic than a single track main line.
And isn't that pretty common today for most trains,
Well,
train lines?
they have done more of that. There's a lot of other things that have entered into it. The thing called positive train control, television, GPS, it's all important. The Union Pacific, for example, today has a GPS unit on top of every locomotive. They know where 11,000 locomotives are because they can see them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was gonna say it's kind of like the airplanes as well, trying to keep
Yes.
track of where they are. Okay. I have another question. You mentioned Greeley, Colorado. So the question is, did you live there and what did you do while you were living in Greeley?
I was a radio farm director, and I had an agricultural background to start with. I was
Okay.
raised on a ranch. My major in college was agricultural journalism, which is
Oh,
journalism with emphasis on writing about or talking about, the case may be, agriculture.
oh,
So I
okay.
was and in the Midwest, there still are a lot of radio farm directors in Iowa, Illinois, those places. Not so much here, and not so much in California, although there are some. But we talked about this, and I worked for a radio station, KFKA in Greeley, Colorado, that was considerably. It had good power. It was an AM station, 1310 on the dial, but we could be heard in Wyoming, southwestern Nebraska, and western Kansas. And I was the person who had the agricultural program. And market reports are very important. In those days, we were the market report. Today, there's everything else. But
Okay. Well, I was gonna say, even when I was going to college in Montana, on the eastern side, there's a lot of agricultural,
yeah,
ranches, and so you could hear actually farm reports
yes,
still,
and
and so
they
it's very
still
important.
exist in lots of parts of the country. And they do different things than they used to do. Market reports aren't quite as important. There's one radio channel, or excuse me, one cable channel on Dish that I know about called RFD television, which is strictly aimed at the rural audience.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I have another question for you. How did you happen to come to Reno? So you were living in Colorado and then
Well, my wife and I got married in 1955, and we had some problems in our family. And we decided we were going to make this thing work. We better get out of Dodge. So we came west looking for a job, and we came to Reno and said, "This is where we want to live." But there were no jobs. There was one television station. Well, no, there was no television station. There was a radio station, two or three radio stations, two newspapers, and no jobs, no ag related jobs. But I, through a set of circumstances, got a position with the University of Nevada in the what was then the Maxey Freshman College of Agriculture, working in the agricultural communications that they had, and I had a radio network of tape. It was a tape situation. We sent out tapes,
okay.
and they played them and sent the tapes back, hopefully. And that's what I did. And then that graduated into what we have today.
Okay. Now I did have a question that you were mentioning a lot of the young men that, were heading west to go to training. Do you know kind of where they were heading in the West? I know there was different training camps, but was it like generally going through Platte? Are they heading towards like California and different places?
Yes. Uh, the Navy had a boot camp training at San Diego, at one of the Great Lakes, which still exists, and one in Idaho called Farragut, which I think has long since been gone. But and the Army did the same way. So it was necessary to ship people to those camps and then ship them to various training facilities. And then before D-Day, it was necessary to assemble nearly 1 million people to go to Europe to land on Omaha Beach. And those all went by train because
Wow.
we didn't have any highway system that accommodated or airline system that accommodated. They went by train.
Okay. Yeah, and
One day
especially
before D-Day, they had 51 trains go through North Platte in one day, each carrying 500 people, roughly.
wow. Okay. I knew, and I mean, it just kept going for quite a while with us being in the war for many years. So,
Yeah.
okay.
What you need to do is move a lot of people quickly. And as quick as they had at that point in time was the railroad.
Okay. Which makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
So do you know, did all the troops heading east or west go through North Platte
No,
or?
no, a lot of them went on the Santa Fe, on the Exorcist
Oh,
and Santa Fe,
okay.
because that was the other main order. But all the rail lines, there were a lot of little railroads, all fed in and fed out of these two big lines. These were the backbone of the movement.
Okay. Okay. Um, Neal, do you want to ask your question? I'm not sure in context about labor to keep the trains, and is it during World War II? I'm sorry, with your
Yes, to keep the operation going, we had Mexican trained engineers and so on come up and keep the tracks going. And we have a full section of photographs that are showing them outlaying track and other people that are working in the foundry section. The only occasions that I saw that were working there was a guy that was probably my age and a guy that wouldn't have been able to join the service. So it was essential that the guys that were signing up and going to war and leaving jobs, keeping the rails going, they had this 6-month tours coming up from Mexico, which were
Oh.
trained engineers and people that worked on these the tracks and so on, Candyman and so.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that.
One
There's-
final thing about railroads, uh, the the railroad couldn't convert quickly enough to diesel electric when they became available, because a steam engine is a traveling, leaking tea kettle. It requires a lot of maintenance. Both when it's running and being back shopped. About every 2 years, you would have to take that locomotive clear apart and start over again. Steam locomotives were difficult to maintain at the best. They're fun to look at, and they pull a lot of things like the big boy that is on tour now. But that takes a lot of maintenance.
That's what I've always heard. Yeah. And don't you have to have special training and licensing ultimately because of the steam and the
Yeah.
potential for explosions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Neal, do you have any other questions or anything you want to mention? This has been a wonderful program and I've learned so much
Well,
about this that I never knew before.
as far as the troops, coming across the country, there was importance on that too, because there was training facilities along the way, and there was even equipment that was loaded on where they built tanks all across the country in different parts of one of them sent the tracks and so on, and there was a large dock that was since removed to make way for Reed track that was extra heavy duty, and there was parts that were loaded on in Reno and then sent to the next place to have another piece of the tank put on. I'm not sure exactly which ones were put on in Reno, but that was all part of a rolling assembly line across the country. The other part on there was a lot of the last minute or specialized training, and Larry knows all about radio, but my dad taught radio to the servicemen on Treasure Island. And he did that as he was coming back and forth to keep track of what was going on in Reno on the weekends. That and the KSFO, the San Francisco radio station that he was, during the week, he was one of the electrical engineers that was in charge in case there was problems or whatever. But that was the communication to the South Pacific that was used on their AM station. They could go ahead. It was a powerful, powerful station, but that was part of the communication system. So there was all kinds of things going on during the war. And Larry knows an awful lot about it. But there's, I don't know, he could just go ahead and rattle on like I'm doing and keep you interested. But there was just a huge amount of things that were going. You get into the airfields and directions and training of all different types. And why was Nevada picked for training of a lot of the aircraft, the pilots? And it was our weather. We didn't have all the fog. It was important that you had to keep things going. We had the 300 days of sunshine. San Francisco, unfortunately, had it was pretty darn populous to start with in case of any problems, but the fog problems every morning took them out of being able to get the training done and get these pilots where they were going to be utilized. So it was an all-out effort, and I just love that video that he brought in. That's the way America can be. Boy, we pull together.
Well,
Now,
yeah, and it was very patriotic.
We had to beat it.
Yeah, you had to beat it.
We were called the greatest generation. I don't know if that's necessarily true.
Oh,
but
no, that's true.
Everybody had to do something. They had to do it to help the effort. It was a common effort.
Yeah. I talk about the
Absolutely,
victory gardens, and everybody had a victory garden.
Yeah.
You betcha.
Well, but they even had kids that would help too, by collecting foil and donating and trying to find rubber and newspaper. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's see, I have another comment. My mom was a World War Army nurse. She was stationed at a military hospital in New Orleans. She was transferred to another in Indio, 29 Palms area. Would she have gone by train? Do you think okay.
Yes, she would. She's probably, if they were on duty, they would go on those medical trains. They had converted cars for the hospital because we brought the wounded back. They were in pretty bad shape, and they all rode in bunks on those cars with medical facility to take care of them.
Okay. Okay. Carol shared a memory. I was young during World War II, but I recall ration stamps. Especially important were the meat ration stamps. I do recall licking a bunch and placing them on a wall. I learned not to do that.
Very good.
Yeah, I would think I would have learned quickly about that. Well, and too, I mean, it's hard to fathom, that so much was rationed and what was allotted. So the generosity of everybody in North Platte and in Nebraska making this canteen such a wonderful place. It's really hard to put my mind around it of how many people, how much food they were producing. It's pretty amazing.
And if you ever lived in or around North Platte, the summers are terrible, miserable, and they had no air conditioning. The trains had no air conditioning. Once in a while, you would find one that would have blocks of ice on it. That was the air conditioning.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that is amazing. Well, gosh, Neal, is there anything else? I think this was wonderful, Larry. I so appreciate you're so knowledgeable, and this was just a great story, and then just the conversations and the questions. So we really appreciate you being our speaker today.
You're entirely welcome.
Sherry, could we just throw in one more railroad thing because he knows a bit
Absolutely.
about the 4100 series.
4014?
41, the big cab forward.
Yeah, it's 4014, 4014.
Okay.
They were called the 4000s by the railroad people.
What were those?
Well,
I don't
it
know.
was the steam engines all had wheel arrangements. The big boys were 4884. And then they had a 13 axle tender, and they were built to haul from Ogden up. If you've ever been to Ogden and driven to Evanston, Wyoming, you come up a steep grade for 60 miles. They were built to haul freight up that. That's what they were originally built for. They were used in other places, but the big boy is roughly two 484 steam engines under one boiler. It's 85 feet long. The whole engine is 103 feet long, and they were built by Alco, American Locomotive Company, in Schenectady, New York. And somebody chalked on the front end on the spoke box door in chalk, big boy, and with the victory sign. We had a victory sign. You had two fingers up like this, and so the name stuck. They were originally going to be called the Wasatch class, but they became the big boys. There were 25 of them, and 8 of them still exist, but only one operates. And the Union Pacific is not telling you how much it costs to restore that locomotive. It sat for 50 years in the park. It was retired in the late 50s. It sat in the Los Angeles County Fair Park for 53 years. And the Union Pacific towed it back to Cheyenne, where they have their steam shop, and rebuild it. Wow. And they're not about to tell you what it costs, but we have guessed at it. The average guess is $3 million that they put into that restoration. Okay. But it pays off every time it goes on the road. Hundreds of people come and see it. Wow. It's the best public relations thing the UP has.
The ones that went over the Sierra had to be cab forward to keep
those were different.
The fumes and stuff from putting the engineers to sleep, from what the story that I was told, because of all the snow sheds and the tunnels. Oh, there was 30 miles of tunnels and snow sheds between here and Sacramento. I know that for a fact.
That was the Southern Pacific, and it ran. Those were also Alcos. But they turned the locomotive around. The cab was on the front end instead of the back end.
Yeah.
As Neal is, and they were oil fired. So you could, the big boys were coal-fired originally. They have the operating one has been since converted to oil because it's a lot easier to have a tourist locomotive with oil than it is with smoke and cinders and dirt and all that.
Wow, that's amazing.
But they accomplished the same thing as Neal has illustrated, that they could go through those tunnels pulling heavy loads.
Okay. So, so then I have a question. So sometimes you'll see, several engines together at the
Mhm.
front of a train. So did the big boy have to have a few engines to help pull if it was really heavy, or?
No, it created somewhere around 14,000 pounds of horsepower. It it,
Oh,
it
wow.
it didn't need any help. Still doesn't. But when they double head them, that's the reason they're matching the load to the amount of motive power that they have on the front end.
Okay. Okay. Wow. Yes, you are very knowledgeable about trains. And I know they just had a VNT conference, I think, a week or
Mhm.
two ago. So I know.
My son belongs to all that.
Oh, okay.
He's in Carson City. He's the real rail expert. I'm the amateur. He's the good one.
I love it. Carol did mention, and I do remember my grandmother talking about this, that things like women's stockings were in short
Mhm.
supply. And she remembers her mom putting on makeup on her legs, and they would draw stocking lines down the back of their legs. I've even heard stories where they would take tea or gravy. It's like, oh, but yeah, to give you kind of a tan look, so you would color your legs and then draw the line up the back. So it's
Yeah,
definitely,
because hose had a steam at that point in time.
yeah, definitely. So that's interesting as well. So just, how it impacted everybody, truly.
One final story, and then we'll quit. The canteen was always in short supply for bread and for ground coffee because they used the white sandwich bread for sandwiches, and there were gallons and gallons of coffee consumed. Excuse me. Anyhow, how to keep a supply of bread and coffee going. And the story goes that the westbound own Union Pacific passenger trains, which originated in Chicago, the diners were restocked in Omaha because they had fed supper and they're going to go on a 36-hour from west of Omaha. So the diners were restocked. But when they restocked the diner in Omaha, the cart that brought this up would come up to one side of the dining car and the doors would open to the kitchen, but half of that would go out the other side and go into a waiting railway express baggage. The same with coffee. And the excuse that they gave, the Union Pacific gave to the passengers, it's wartime, it's ration, you get one piece of bread and one cup of coffee. And the other half was loaded in the mail car at the front end. Railroads had railway post offices at that point in time. They carried mail. Okay. They were the mail carrier. Okay. And all this bread and coffee would go in the mail car and be put in mail sacks labeled for North Platte. And when the train arrived at North Platte, that was unloaded in the post office truck and taken to the back door of the canteen where they unloaded the bread and the coffee and kept the supply of bread and coffee going by the supplies they had purloined from the diner.
Oh, that's wonderful. I like that. That's very good. So yeah, it's important that everybody participated and helped with that. So well, thank you, Larry. This has been a wonderful program, and I hope everyone that is watching and will watch once the video is up on our website and on Washoe County Library's website will really appreciate and learning more about North Platte today. So thank you so much, Washoe County Library Systems. They've been wonderful and have supported us through the years, and HARPS as well. And so, as always, thank you so much. And I'll send it back to Mila.
Thank you so much, Sherry, Neal, and Larry. That was such a fascinating and touching program. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us. And to our tech pro, Russell from the library, who does all the tech magic on the backside, thank you so much as well. With that, thanks again and have a lovely day, everybody.